Hello, my name is Etan. I am the founder of the Help Me Fix video chat maintenance platform. I'm also the owner of Elite Heating and Plumbing. I am speaking to landlords and property professionals, key influencers in the property industry, to find out more about what it's like to be a landlord and to having to deal with tenants, dealing with property management, dealing with contractors, what challenges are faced, pain points. I'm trying to find out more about what it's like in the real world to invest and manage properties. To do this, I'm speaking to a couple of key players. First on my list today is Sharon Machon. She is an investor and she's a landlord. She is involved in mentoring landlords all around the country, and she has something called the Property Management Program that she runs, and also a guide associated with this. She's a very conscientious person, trying to improve the lives of tenants and landlords all over the country. So enough from me. Here is the interview. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you get something from it. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me today. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is educate landlords and help landlords by kind of highlighting pain points in what they do and issues with tenants, issues with managing properties, which is basically what you're an expert in. So you're a perfect person to talk to. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about you and your experience and what you're doing to help landlords day to day. So I'm just going to introduce you.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Okay. All right. I'm Sharon Machon. I am a property investor and property manager. I guess I'll tell you a little bit more about my background shortly. My main business is Foxtrot Properties, which is our property management company, but we've recently, over lockdown, set up the Property Management Program, which is a new business that we've started based on our property management experience and how we can help other landlords and property investors wider than simply just taking on landlords to manage properties for in our local area. So it'll give us a much greater reach and we'll be able to help many more people.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean that's really kind of what attracted me to you in the first place. You're out there helping landlords day to day. It's what you do for a living. I'm very interested in the property management program, as I imagine lots of people will be that are watching this interview. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do day to day as part of the property management program.
Sure. Okay. So the property management program was really born out of my own personal experience. So when I first got into property investing, I couldn't find any property management agents that really managed property as I wanted them managing, with like an investor mindset. So that's how I ended up setting up my own property management company, was to manage my own properties. And obviously in talking to other landlords and doing lots of networking, I could see that lots of other people had the same issues as well. So what we did was we effectively documented all of our business processes, checklists, templates, everything that we have, and we created the landlord's ultimate how-to guide is what we called it, and it is like it's a very, very detailed lever arch file with everything in it. It's effectively a business in a box, and actually some people who've purchased it, I've then gone on to help them set up their own letting agency, as I did when I first started. Now on the back of that, there's obviously lots more questions and people want more support, so what we've then created is an online training program. So it's a 9-month training program, and it goes through step by step everything you need to know about property management, from the very beginning of how to get yourself legal and your property legally compliant, all the way through vetting a tenant, managing the property yourself, dealing with trades, contractors, keeping yourself legal, through to ending a tenancy and what to do with disputes at the end. Now obviously that's a bit more in depth, so as part of that you get I say a 9-month program. We do different topics month on month, and then there's a conference call as well each month to help people through any topics or answer any questions that they have. So it's really quite in depth and in detail.
Sounds like it. And that's really interesting about what you were saying about when you first started investing and you couldn't find a company, a property management company that could do it kind of exactly the way that you wanted it to be done. And this isn't actually in my questions, but just while we're talking about it, what were those things that those points that kind of you felt that you could do better?
Yeah, I was having to think about this actually, because I was actually speaking to one of my clients yesterday, and so we tend to manage in the Warrington and Wigan area, and one of my clients has got properties slightly out of area, and she's really not happy with the agent, and she's asking if we could actually expand and help her manage her other properties in areas we don't currently cover. So we're in discussions with her about that at the moment, because obviously I want to help her, she's a current client, but also our level of service is based on the fact that we can be at any property physically within 20 minutes if there's an emergency or a maintenance issue or anything like that. So geographic location is actually really important. And when I asked her what she was unhappy about with her current agent and why she wanted us to manage them, they're exactly the same problems that I had when I first started out. So for me, the really basic things like not getting regular rental remittance statements, having to chase the agent for statements of how much they've charged you, whether there's been any invoices in the month, what deductions have been, not getting the rent paid on the same day each month, so it's erratic, you never know when the money's going to come in, so you're not sure if the tenants are behind or not, but also dealing with maintenance issues, not doing property inspections properly or at all, if at all, and really struggling to deal with the trades, so they'll maybe put a markup on everything, so you're paying over the odds for trades, or not actually getting the trades out in a timely manner. And not actually responding to the tenant. So in my view, the tenant is a customer as much as the property owner is. And so we have you know, we deal with tenant issues within 24 hours if we can. And she was saying it's that some things are dragging on for weeks. And I don't think that doesn't give the tenant a good perception of the agent or of the landlord. And it's those sorts of, they're really basic property management issues that I don't think you should be having to chase your agent for. That should be taken as read.
Yeah, so that's the second time today that I've heard a tenant being called a customer, and I've never ever heard that before. But I guess if you think about it, yeah, the tenant is your customer, I suppose. Just you know, it's funny you say that. Obviously, I'm coming in, so I come from a background of a contractor background, so I know I watch the chain go from tenant to property management to contractor to property management to landlord back to property management. So I watched the whole thing happen, and yeah, I think it's quite a challenging chain, right, to put together, and everyone needs to be on top of their game to be able to deliver what they need to deliver. Okay, that's great. That's really interesting to know. So I can see here, instead of just asking you, you've sent me this fantastic bio. I can see that you've been investing since the early 2000s, but you really kind of took off and took control and started doing it really professionally with an external investor from 2011. Can I just ask you personally, and if you mind me asking you, then please just say I mind you asking, but in your personal portfolio, how many properties do you own personally?
Okay, that's actually quite a complex question. So my husband and I personally own 9 properties, I think it is.
Okay.
We're all then in a joint venture partnership with another like 20 properties, so it's a bit complex, I would suggest.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not like I own this many properties. We've got various different financial structures and partnerships and all those sorts of things, and yeah, so it's not a simple.
Yeah, I know. I think
it's more than a few. It's more than a few.
I'm oversimplifying it from my layman's kind of point of view. Yeah. Okay, so what tools do you give landlords? How do you teach them to take control and start managing their own properties?
Yeah, so I think control is a really good word. This is also some feedback that I've had from landlords as well, in that you know, they pay a lot of money to do property investment training in some cases, But then once they get the keys and they've handed it over to an agent, they feel like that they've lost control, that maybe the agent's telling them what to do. And I'm like, no, they're your agent, they should be acting on your behalf, you should be instructing them. And they feel that maybe they've lost control and that the tenant and the agent is telling them what to do, but they don't know enough to be able to challenge back. So what we do is we teach them what their responsibilities are legally and professionally, and that they're actually running a business. And yes, property investment is great, and a lot of these courses will teach you that it's passive, and it can be if you get the right systems and people in place, but that doesn't mean to say that you delegate or neglect your responsibilities and simply hand it over. You can't just walk away. I mean, there's a famous phrase, the absent landlord makes no money. So even you do want to put a passive system in place, you still need to be responsible, and the buck stops with you. So what we do is we teach people what they need to know in terms of all the rules and regulations that impact them, how to stay on the right side of all of those regulations, and how to provide a good customer service to their tenants. So you want a tenant that's happy, that stays long term, that looks after your property. That's a valuable asset. You want the tenant to help you maintain and increase the value of your asset. So it's a whole different mindset than maybe people coming in and going, oh, I've got a property, walk away. You know, we often hear trades, and I know you're from a trade background, so I'm sure this isn't you, but trades going, oh, it's only a rental, it's only a tenant, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, it does matter. I'm like, you can't do a shoddy job because it's a rental, because that's still somebody's investment. It's an asset that has value, and you've got a person living in there who is a customer and who deserves a good level of service as well. So we teach people that whole philosophy and that principle, and then even if they do want to have an agent in place, they are then an informed customer, so they can make sure they get the right agent, and they can ask the right questions and make sure the agent is doing the annual gas safety certificates and all of the other documents are in place, and the landlord's not going to be left exposed under any regulations.
Would you say, so just taking an assumption from what you're telling me, would you say that your mission as a company and as an individual is to empower landlords and to give them
education and knowledge and get them to get control back of their investment?
Yeah. So this is what I'm hearing like everywhere, and I have a vision of a landlord lying in bed at night, looking up at the ceiling, worrying whether their tenant's going to pay the rent, worrying if they're getting ripped off, worrying if, just worrying.
Yeah.
So what would you say if you had to let's say list 3 biggest fears of a landlord? What would you say, or even just one? Where would you start? What's a landlord's biggest fear?
Okay, so I actually did a little bit of a presentation on worries of landlords, and I did a little bit of research. One of the things that came up was the top 3 insurance claims. And I think this fits in well with what landlords worry about. So the biggest thing is not getting paid the rent. And that whether that's whether you have working professionals or people on benefits, there's still risks of whichever sort of tenant that you take. Damage to the property, criminal damage to the property, whether that be the tenant smashes up the property or puts a cannabis farm in, or then basically just doesn't take care of the property. We do see, you'll see in the press people living in awful states in the properties, but actually it's because the tenant hasn't cleaned up, or they've let the pets defecate throughout the property and not cleaned it up. That's not the landlord's fault, that's the tenant's fault, not keeping care of the property. So they're the biggest worries that seem to come back in terms of what people are worried about who have investment properties.
Yeah, I get it. So insurance, yeah, massive, like an insurance claim, like a flood or something like that, and then tenants kind of destroying the property, and not non-payment of rent is a massive thing, right? So, and would you say that a happy tenant is one that's more likely to pay their rent? So if they're happy, they've got then less of a reason, unless obviously you just get a bad tenant, which happens, right? But obviously, the less stress that the tenant's going through, the less stress they're going to pass on to the landlord, I imagine is fairly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you want to keep the tenant as happy as possible, but in terms of reducing the risk of a tenant not paying the rent, it's about finding the right tenant in the first place and making sure they're financially viable. What we tend to find is that many people who would apply to rent a property from us don't understand their own financial situation, and they don't realise that they can't actually afford the property that they're applying to rent. They haven't factored in bills, insurance, they haven't factored in, you know, sick leave from work. What if they get made redundant? They don't have any savings or any contingency, and they don't realise they can't actually afford what they're applying for. So it's about understanding financial viability and having a proper vetting process in place. So if you're sure that, you know, the tenant does understand their finances, can budget appropriately and can afford the property, then the extra things you can do in terms of keeping the tenant happy, making sure you're on top of any maintenance issues in the property as well, that just smooths the relationship as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And do you teach landlords how to like do credit checks on their tenants and things like that? And yeah,
that's absolutely key to what we do. That is, you know, the biggest thing, and that's a bit that I think most landlords are scared about. They don't know how to do it, or they don't know how to read the results when the reports come back. So what they tend to do is outsource to third-party agencies. But in my experience, those third-party agencies not always are as vigilant and some of the references as they might be. They just take the tenant's word for things. They don't actually then go and follow up. So we teach how to actually do proper due diligence on the tenant applicant.
Okay. When let's say, for instance, I'm a landlord. Let's say I'm not just starting out. Let's say I've been burnt a couple of times and I've decided I've had enough. Right, you know, it's the last straw, and I want to start looking after my own house. That's what I want to do. If I came to you, what's your experience of the biggest frustrations that people that come to you have? What are they most frustrated about in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, so in that example, if a landlord was to come to us that has been burnt in the past, and that would usually be a property's been trashed and they've not been able to keep the deposit for some reason, that a tenant has failed to pay the rent and they've ended up going through months and months of eviction and thousands of pounds down and not sure what to do. In most of those cases, it tends to be because they haven't understood the process in the first place, so they didn't vet the tenant properly, they didn't issue the paperwork correctly in the first place. There's lots of aspects of property management which is actually just down to paperwork, and if you don't issue the right piece of paper at the right time to the tenant, then you can't get your property back. And so it's missing that understanding and appreciation of the legal aspect, as well as, you know, what we talked about earlier, the financial viability aspect of the tenants. So most landlords I see get tripped up really on a technicality, and that's why they end up in trouble. Okay,
and all right, playing a bit of down the rabbit hole here, if we're talking about educating landlords, which is essentially what you're doing, you are giving landlords the tools that they need and showing them how to do things. Okay, so if we're talking about educating landlords and saying that landlords often don't really know, or they're worried about, you know, the whole credit checking process, they're worried about this, they're worried about how to do their due diligence, have you thought about educating the tenant as well? Like, for instance, when they move in, do they know exactly, you know, what to do in case of a problem? Do they know you know, how to report a maintenance issue? Do they know, have they got emergency contacts in case something goes wrong? Do they know where the fuse box is? Do they know where the gas meter is? Do they know how to turn the water off in an emergency? Do you think this is also important?
That's absolutely crucial, and we do that. So when we move a tenant into a property, we say to them, you need to allow at least an hour, and we literally show them how the front door works, where the stopcock is, where the gas and the electric meters are, how to switch them off in an emergency. We've produced, for every single property we manage, we've produced a laminated sheet of where all the emergency shut-offs are, and they're left in the property. So if the tenant needs them, or they call a trade out or an emergency services, it's there, and you can literally go to that, because sometimes stopcock isn't where you think it is. You know, it might be in the downstairs toilet, not under the kitchen sink, for example. And you're like, where the bloody hell is it? And I'm like, you know, you've got water pouring through the ceiling. So we do that induction with tenants, and I think a lot of high street agents don't. They'll have the tenant come to their office, they'll hand the keys over, and that's it. And that just isn't good enough. So in particular with HMOs as well, we've got notice boards, so we talk them all through all the various different certificates we have up there. We have emergency phone numbers out of our phone numbers. We give them emergency numbers like the police, the fire, Transco, the water company. All of this they get up front as part of the move-in process, and I think that's really important, and that also then reduces any questions or queries that they have going forwards when they're like, you know, it's Friday night and they're like, can't figure out how to, you know, the electric's tripped, I don't know where the fuse box is, for example.
Yeah, and you're also covering, you're just covering bases, aren't you? You're covering yourselves, you're helping them to deal with stuff. You know, okay, so I'm a tenant, I rent, and you know, when I moved into this property, I just moved in. Right, that was it. I think that they kind of knew that I was.
Yeah, well, you probably know what you're doing, but a lot of people don't.
I think the handover was a bit more relaxed with me because they knew that, you know, like I can pretty much do everything. So, okay, lovely. What makes you angry when you think about, like, what's one of your pain points? So when you see something, what really gets your goat and you think, oh.
One of the biggest challenges that we have day to day is people, is managing people, whether that's tenants, whether, you know, it's suppliers or contractors, is people don't do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it, and you're constantly having to chase people up. You know, it's like we had an electrician, he's like, I will go to the house on Monday. Tuesday, the tenants are like, oh, that guy never turned up yesterday. He didn't phone us. He didn't say he couldn't go for whatever reason. You know, he didn't ring to rearrange. And I'm like, we're constantly having to chase. Even with big suppliers, you know, we've got an issue with Scottish Power at one of the properties at the moment. The landlord wants to move suppliers, and we're just on the phone constantly to Scottish Power, and they just won't engage. They don't return your calls. The customer service is rubbish. And that is probably you know, a big pain point, is chasing people up and making sure stuff gets done.
And especially contract, because we are notoriously bad at, like,
sorry, but yes.
No, it's right, like not turning up. I work in an industry where I'm constantly trying to change perceptions, because that's not how, let's say, for instance, my company would do things. But I understand that most people, oh my God, I had it the other day. Yeah. I had an electrician that needed to do some work at my grandma's house, and I give this guy a lot of work through my plumbing and heating company, and just didn't call the tenant and just didn't turn up, and then didn't send the EICR when it was done. Yeah. And took like 3 days, and we needed it like now. Because it's a legal requirement, we needed to submit it and so on and so forth. So yeah, I completely understand. So experience with, you know, that would be then come under as like a bad experience with contractors. Have you ever had any other kind of bad experiences directly with contractors where something has gone wrong?
How long have you got?
Like, I've got all day. Let's go. Why don't you give me a couple of the worst?
Okay. Let's start off with something simple. We were doing a refurbishment on a property, and our normal contractor wasn't available, I can't remember whatever reason. So we got another contractor in to install a shower over a bath, and he installed it while not standing in the bath. so it was far too low. And then when, so Steve's my husband and business partner, so Steve went to the property to check and sign off what had been done, and he stood in the bath and the shower head was down here, and he, like, literally it was in completely the wrong place. And he phoned the guy and said, what have you done? He's like, oh, well, it was above my head when I installed it, but he installed it outside of the bath, not in the bath. That's
Right.
really simple, a simple one. We had a plumber from a few years ago. So when we started reinvesting personally around 2011, 2012, we had 5 or 6 projects on the go all at the same time. And we had a plumber there that we basically gave all of our work to because we thought he was good. Turns out not. Every single plumbing job he did in those houses has since leaked. Every single
Right.
Okay, and then the bigger issues, we did a major refurbishment for an overseas client. So we also, a little while ago, we were sourcing properties for international investors, and we were project management refurbishment. We got, obviously before we start, we do asbestos testing to make sure there's no asbestos in the property before the trades go in, part of the health and safety checks. We got a reputable company in and they went, no, there's no asbestos in there. We got their trades in, the trades started smashing the plaster off the wall immediately, found asbestos board, plasterboard. Now, fortunately, they'd been on an awareness training course, so they spotted it straight away, down tools, shut the house was closed for 14 days. You know, it was a whole HSC reporting issue. We ended up basically trying to sue the asbestos testing company. We had to get another company in. Turned out the whole house was riddled with asbestos and we had to rip out basically back to brick. That was quite a traumatic experience.
That sounds very traumatic. I mean, obviously, I all my guys do asbestos awareness, but I know that a lot of people, they don't even know what it looks like. I mean, you've got things like Durastone that they used to make flues in 20, 30 years ago, and even the people that fitted them didn't even realize they had asbestos in them. So you've got this massive knowledge gap. Okay, that's really, really interesting to know. How do you, just as a follow-on from that, how do you get your contractors? How do you find them, and then how do you vet them?
Okay, so we try and get them through referrals. That's harder and harder these days. So and people will approach me and say, can you recommend somebody? And I'm like, actually I used to, but I can't anymore, because actually they're only good as the last job, and I might recommend somebody and they'd let you down and it looks bad on me. So I'm like, I've used this person, but I'm not recommending them. It's up to you to do your own due diligence. So we do check them out. What we then do is we make sure that they have the right qualifications and insurances. So we ask for their insurance documents before they start to make sure they're properly insured for what they're doing. And then we start them out with very small jobs, and we'll give them very small jobs and see how they handle that. Do they turn up? Can they quote appropriately? Does the actual cost come in on quotation? How do they handle? Because for us, it's not just about can they do the job, it's about can they understand the business that they're in as well, and understand that the landlord does need a quote, they do need an invoice for their accountant. It's not just turning up, doing the job and going, oh, and by the way, can you pay me by 5 o'clock cash, sort of thing. It's like, no, it's not any of that. So we do have lots of checks and balances in place to make sure that we work with the right contractors.
That's interesting. I mean, finding the right contractors, and as you say, the right contractor today might have a bad day or just become the wrong contractor. You just don't know, do you? It's a very, very difficult place to be in. You know, and even when you get down to like vetting sites, what are the standards? You know, how do you even if like, for instance, if I was to pluck someone off one at like Checker Trade or something, how do I know?
Yeah, I don't know. You can't. So yeah, so the plumber that fitted the shower in the wrong place, he was on one of those sites.
Yeah, 10 out of 10. Yeah. Okay. Interesting again. Okay. Okay, something maybe a little bit lighter. Funniest tenant story that you have ever heard or that you have experienced yourself?
Funniest tenant story.
A funny anecdote. What's the funniest thing you've ever heard? I know what I've heard, and I heard it from someone on LinkedIn. which was hilarious. But have you ever had like a funny tenant story where something's happened that maybe shouldn't have happened?
We've had lots of those, but I wouldn't say they were funny. We've had fights, we've had hammer attacks, we've had bricks thrown through windows, a mistaken identity of somebody that lived at a property. We've had cars keyed outside houses.
Oh God.
Yeah, mistaken identity. But then on the other hand, some of our tenants are brilliant, absolutely brilliant, you know, so they ring us up and say there's such and such an issue, and we can talk to them over the phone. You know, they've got some common sense. It might be as simple as topping up the boiler loop, for example. We can talk them through how to do that over the phone.
Okay.
You know, we've had some really nice tenants who have given us great testimonials. They refer their friends and colleagues to us because, you know, we've got a great reputation and they've really enjoyed renting from us. So yeah, lots of stories, definitely.
Okay.
Stories.
In what you do you use, so for instance, like, do you use like software like Arthur or like Rick Gannon software, Go Tenant, or anything like that? I mean, what kind of tools do you use inside your processes? Do you have any software or any kind of tools that you use?
Yeah, well, we have tried those software packages, but in some cases, I think they're a little bit over-engineered, and it's really simple to manage a property. It's not rocket science.
Okay.
You know, so now that we're growing and we are quite a sizable agency, might reconsider that. But basically, if you're organised, Excel spreadsheet and a Google Calendar is pretty much all you need.
Yeah, I'm 100% agree with you. I've got spreadsheets all over the place. That's how I organize myself, different to-do lists, different spreadsheets.
The thing with things like Arthur or Go Tenant or any of those other things, they're basically just glorified spreadsheets. If you put the wrong data in or don't update the data, it's rubbish in, rubbish out. You've still got to make sure that the data quality is there. And if you input into a software package, you might as well input to a spreadsheet.
That's very interesting. Okay, thank you. If you could, last question, before we talk about what you're doing a little bit more. If you could wave a magic wand, right? So you had a magic wand and you said, right, I want to change the whole industry. Like, and I don't mean investing. I mean, so we're talking today specifically about property management, property maintenance. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it and just change the whole thing, how would it look?
If we're talking about property management and maintenance in particular, I think it would be around the relationship between the trades and the tenants, so that the tenants understand that the trades are people too. Sometimes they have a bad day, sometimes they have emergency. It's fine if they don't turn up, but tell people you're not going to turn up. But also around the trades as well, I think you know, it's really good that people, you know, you get time served decorators or plumbers or whatever. That's all really good. But it'd be good as well if as part of that training they got some business awareness training as well, how to set up as a business, make sure you've got the right insurances, invoicing, all that sort of thing, and around the relationship management as well, so that people, I think the rented sector is seen quite negatively or not importantly. So I think I mentioned maybe earlier on, you know, we get a lot of trades who we don't use basically say, oh, it don't matter, it's only a rental, or it don't matter, it's only a tenant. And I think the perception of the rental sector is leaves a lot to be desired, and I don't know why it's seen as second rate, but it is. But I think that then that culture sort of like pervades throughout the whole industry, and I think that's a bad thing. I think people should be more professional in their approach in every aspect, and that's what we're trying to do.
That's interesting. We're talking about accountability, really, aren't we? We're talking about the fact that the contractor is not accountable really to the tenant. They're accountable to the landlord, and the landlord's not there.
Exactly that. Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. I agree. It's just the tenant. Like that's what you hear all the time. Funny that, because I'm always fighting for the tenant. I've got to be honest. Like, tenant's the one without the hot water.
Exactly.
Tenant's the one with the kids, like, that can't have a bath. So I'm always fighting for the tenant. And then at the same time, now I'm like fighting for the landlord as well, because I'm like, oh my God, the landlord's like got all this crap to deal with and has like a really terrible time trying to get everything sorted. So it's a very complex dynamic between, yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. All right, well, look, thank you very much for taking the time to answer my questions today. You have answered them fantastically. Can you please tell anyone that's watching this interview how to get on your program, how to get hold of your guide, where to go, you know, tell them all about how to take control of their properties?
Sure, okay. Well, we do have lots of free resources. So we're on Facebook. Our Facebook page is actually called Investor Circular. So this is a group that people can join, and we post there regularly on our own experiences in terms of property management. So for example, yesterday, Steve was out dealing with an issue of rats that had got into a property. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't the tenant's fault. Their house is absolutely spotless. It's just unfortunate the environment that the property is in, which isn't great. So we talk about how to deal with those sorts of things, but we also talk about the legal side of things as well. So there's been a lot through the lockdown about the Coronavirus Act, changes in legislation, how that impacts property investors. So we also post regularly on that. And we have a YouTube channel, which is called PMP TV. So again, we post on there. So the really short videos are like 10 minutes or less on key topics. So both the day-to-day practical management side, but also the legal side. Then if people actually want a copy of our guide, probably the easiest thing to do is just to email me. So it's info@thepropertymanagementprogram.co.uk. The website's currently undergoing review at the moment, so it's not quite live yet. And the same email address as well if you want to know more about our programme. Happy to answer any questions and have a chat with people to see if it's relevant for them. I get that, you know, our training isn't necessarily relevant to everybody all of the time. So if people just want to have a chat, we can see what their particular situation is, what their problem is, and what the best solution to that might be.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for spending time with me today. It's been fantastic. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that will benefit from it as well. Okay, thanks a lot, Sharon. Bye.
All right, bye.